Welcome to Honest HR, the podcast for informed and aspiring HR professionals intent on transforming workplace challenges into golden opportunities.
Every week, we chat with industry experts to bring you insights, trends, and actionable advice through relatable stories from the real world of HR.
Honest HR is a SHRM podcast, and by joining us, you're helping to build a more engaged workforce and drive organizational success. I'm Wendy Fong.
I'm Amber Clayton.
And I'm Monique Akanbi.
Now, let's get honest.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Amber Clayton, your co-host of Honest HR, and today we're going to be talking about maximizing the candidate experience in your recruiting results. I have with me here today Nicole Belyna from SHRM. How are you, Nicole?
Hi, Amber. I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us. Well, Nicole, to start us off, can you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do at SHRM?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, I have the distinct pleasure of being your colleague, and I'm the director of talent here at SHRM. So that means that I drive the talent strategy for the organization from all the way from candidate attraction to hiring, assessing, developing, and excitingly promoting and moving our people across the organization.
Great. Well, I know you've got a busy role at SHRM, and I know that many employers, they struggle to find talent within their organizations, and they're competing with other employers. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today and hopefully giving some, great tips to our audience members about this. So when potential candidates are looking at an organization's job postings, what are a few things that employers could do to help those job postings stand out to them?
Yeah, great question. You see all kinds of job postings out there, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. There's examples of really great ones. There's examples of ones that are not so great, and I think part of it is matching the job postings with the organization, right? It's sort of it can be the first introduction to an organization for a candidate. So, even just ensuring that it's on brand, does it reflect the brand as a larger organization, and then the employer brand itself. And so, when you start getting into the details of the job posting, I think there's kind of a sweet spot. Job descriptions need to be succinct, and compelling and clear. So you want to tell the story, or at least give a feel for the organization, a quick overview of the role, what the candidate will be doing. Can they imagine themselves in the role, right? And how they'll make an impact. And then some of the key details, right? You don't necessarily need to include the other duties as assigned that you might see in a job description, things like that. But enough to be compelling to a candidate to say, you know what, I'm intrigued and I think I can do this job. And so I'll apply.
So is there anything that employers should exclude or include to make sure that the job posting is enticing?
Yeah, great question. As I said, maybe including a little, just a little introduction about the organization is always helpful. A lot of organizations now are including an overview of benefits, right? It's not just about the job itself, but, can you imagine yourself as an employee? What are the benefits that the organization is going to offer you?
Mhm.
There may be an organization that really invests in professional development or, internal development, and that could be compelling to someone. Do they have open leave? Do they have pet insurance? Right. And so there's those details that can really be compelling and pull a candidate in and be attractive to the right candidate. Again, I think telling the story of the job and helping the candidate imagine themselves in the role is really important. So, getting a clear expectation of what they'll be doing and perhaps kind of how they'll do it, I think is also really, really important. Things that you can certainly leave off, right? As I mentioned quickly, the other duties as assigned, maybe some of the, some of those types of things you can certainly leave off and address further along in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I've heard stories of people applying for positions, and then including myself. I have actually had that where I've applied for a position before. It was something on the website and the job posting, but then when I get into the interview process, it was not exactly what it had been posted. So I think setting those clear expectations is really important. I do tell my candidates, yeah, I give them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes I think you almost have to do that. Be transparent in those job descriptions, because if they're going to have to work late nights or evenings, make sure that the person knows that before they spend an hour applying for the position. I think those types of things are really important to make sure that you are clear when you're posting those jobs for the candidates.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Amber, of transparency. And that's something that, we hear loud and clear, right? You
Mhm.
have said as a hiring manager, you hear it. We hear it on the HR side. Candidates absolutely want transparency as much as we can give them. And so um whether it's a clear expectation of the job, as we've discussed, um, getting a view into the organization, the benefits, as I pointed out, and then also, today a lot of in many cases, either by law or by choice,
Mhm.
organizations are also including salary ranges, right?
Mhm.
So, I think that the bigger the window that we can give to candidates early on, the better.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the salary range piece of it, because I know that there are locations, states or cities that actually require employers to put either the minimum wage for the position, their minimum salary, or a range for that position. And I've heard from employers who have said, we really don't want to do that because we're concerned that other people in the organization might know what the range is, or that when people apply for the role, that they're going to want the maximum of the range. How might, and I'm not sure if this is a question that you would answer or not, but how might a candidate or an employer address that if, say, for instance, the candidate comes in and says, I desire the max of the range? How might an employer or hiring manager address that with the candidate?
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, on the talent acquisition side, in my opinion, sharing the salary range early on um, makes things a whole lot easier, right? You have that conversation right off the bat. And it does give you some insight about how candidates talk about their salary expectations. If somebody's automatically looking for, the high end of the range, it certainly doesn't disqualify them, right? Just to
Mhm.
be clear.
Mhm.
But how they talk about it, how the discussion that we have about it can certainly give us some insight. And who knows, that person may be at the top of the posted range, right? And that's okay. But certainly, when the talent acquisition team is having those discussions, they can share with the candidate, look, the range is based on your uh, what you bring to the table,
Mhm.
your relevant experience, and a variety of different factors for the role. So, is it impossible that we would hire somebody, or that an organization would hire somebody at the top of the range? No, not necessarily, but there's
Mhm.
a number of factors that go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I myself, I actually prefer that someone lists the job, range or the minimum, because at least I know. And if it is something that's, much lower than what my expectations are, then I'm not going to spend an hour and a half filling out their application online and submitting my resume if it's not a position that is within the range that I'm looking for. So I feel like as a potential candidate, I would prefer to have that information up front.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So how does an organization's digital presence affect the candidate experience?
Great question. So it can be good or bad, right?
Mhm.
It really depends on how cohesive the organization's digital presence is.
Mhm.
Um, but let's focus on the good for a minute, right? If an organization has a really solid, cohesive message that can help people decide if the organization is right for them. It gives them a little glimpse into the organization's story, into their priorities. Oftentimes you can, learn about mission and vision, take a look at potential colleagues, things like that. And so, you know, it gives people just more information to make a decision. Is this organization right for me? Is if they've applied already, it can help them prepare for their interview, right? It's another kind of form of transparency to some extent, which I think, if they can do their research, they can better prepare for an interview.
Mhm.
It can kind of put the candidate at ease a little bit more and prepare questions, maybe, right? Like, here's something I saw online that I want to ask about during my interview. So certainly, I would say for the most part, it can be a really positive thing. They can refer to LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Instagram, a variety of social media platforms too, to just get a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like an organization's digital presence can also be really negative for the organization if there's something out there that, doesn't um, appear as though the company has like a good workplace culture, or maybe there's negative comments and negative reviews.
Yeah.
So how can HR professionals help to booster their organization's presence to help, draw in those quality candidates?
Yeah, great question. I always encourage HR professionals to, you know, build their own digital presence,
Mhm.
right? So they can, and that's a combination of things. They can share wins in the organization, right? If they're a top workplace, if, maybe they've um, acquired a new well-known client, any sort of wins, right? Any engagement with the local community, things like that. But then they can also leverage their own expertise, right? Kind of share, um, tell their own story, tell the story as their, from their perspective as an employee of the organization. Uh, you know, and let's say an organization doesn't have some, or there is some negativity, right,
Mhm.
around the digital presence for an organization. It allows HR professionals to kind of tell a different story, um, to kind of balance it out. And, it comes from them. There's a sort of personal testimony about it. They can also share jobs, right, to selfishly, right, get the word out to fill those positions. So, it's a way that HR professionals can build credibility for themselves as well as their organization.
Yeah, and that's good to know, that I'm actually doing the right thing because I'm not one that posts on LinkedIn or social media often when it comes to work. But when I do, for example, I had recently posted about my anniversary with the organization, and I also posted about teams and being able to work with my teams who are remote who came in December, and it's awesome. And just being able to share those things with others, I think helps to show what type of a culture we have, and just the commitment and loyalty of myself and others within the organization. So at least I know now that I'm doing a good positive thing for us.
Yeah, 100%, right? And it's
Yeah.
fun, for sure. It's a different type of engagement, right?
Mhm.
Different type of employee engagement, as you point out. From a talent acquisition perspective, sometimes people who respond to, I might look at your post and there might be a potential candidate there, right? So it's
Yeah.
a source of opportunity as well. So yes, keep doing it. Share all of those positive things, and happy anniversary, by the way.
Oh,
So
thank you. I appreciate that. I have one every year, so if you wanna wish me a happy anniversary for every time. Um, so let's talk about interviews for a moment, and, this is actually a question that I've had before, and that's around the number of interviews that you get. Some candidates report, having as many as 5 interviews for one position, and the question comes about, like, how many interviews is too many interviews? I know for me, what we tend to do is we, hire people. We have, of course, phone screens, and we have interview processes, and we do job previews, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But what is too many nowadays?
yeah, I, I'm going to give an annoying answer and say it depends, right? I think certainly 5 interviews is a lot. even for most roles within an organization, right? Unless you're really looking at maybe a much more senior executive level interview. Um, but it depends, and certainly, an individual contributor, maybe an entry level role, they should not be doing 5 interviews, right? The role is simply not that complex where you need to put this person through that many interviews. And so, but that's something that my team talks about during our recruitment strategy meetings. We'll talk through the process, who will be part of the process, you know, and within those steps, what needs to be accomplished during that interview, right? So obviously there's your initial phone screen with the talent acquisition team. Then, the hiring manager might do a next discussion. Let's say, what do you hope to accomplish from that interview? What do you hope to accomplish from these additional interviews? And so talking through it, we might decide like, hey, we originally thought we needed to do 3 interviews. Maybe we only need to do 2. Maybe we need to do 2 interviews, and we'd like to, as you alluded to, do some sort of job preview or a project. And so I think you just have to be thoughtful about utilizing your time, your team's time, and the candidate's time wisely. So we know what the outcome is. And then once you decide how many interviews you'll conduct for each position, um, setting that expectation with the candidate front, right? We have sort of picked up this theme of transparency and managing candidates' expectations. And I think that's an important one to address, right? So if I, as a recruiter, decide based on my phone screen, I'd like to advance them forward, it's helpful to let them know, hey, this is what the interview process will look like. It may take 3 interviews with the hiring manager, your colleagues, and then there's an assignment. And I think just managing the expectations and letting the candidate know what to expect can be incredibly helpful. If you tell a candidate, hey, this will be 3 interviews, and then the next thing you know, the person goes through 3 interviews, and they're like, hey, we want to have this person come back and talk to so and so or this person. And so that's when the candidate experience kind of starts to go downhill, right? And you might lose the candidate.
Yeah. I mean, I could see that. Of course, when there are a lot of job openings and employers are trying to find people, having them go through a 5-part process, more than likely, you're not even going to be able to get that candidate through all 5 parts. Unless, for example, they are currently working, or maybe they really want to work for your organization. So they'll do whatever it takes to actually, work there. But I just couldn't see, for example, an entry level, as you said, going through a 5-person or 5-interview process. Doesn't make much sense for a retail or restaurant entry level role, but maybe for a management position, it might, just depending on the person's level of responsibility and what they're going to be doing for the organization.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Completely agree. So I mentioned job previews, and job previews is something that I've done in my past experience, where I have someone who comes in and they shadow someone who's in the same position. They get to learn a little bit more about what the role is. They get to ask questions. I find it really helpful for them and for us, because they get to see what the job is and decide whether or not it's good for them. And of course, we get to see, them, and are they asking questions? Do they seem interested? Are they asking questions other than when's the breaks, or, how many vacation days do I get? Are they really showing interest in the role? And so with that, I know that, as you mentioned, some employers also ask employees or candidates to do work assignments as part of the recruitment process. Now, as far as my job preview and the way I see it, I don't necessarily have them do work assignments, because of course, in this particular situation, it's not work. They're just observing, and they're not doing any kind of paid work at all. But, what is, a work assignment, as far as the recruitment process, and how reasonable is it for them to do a work assignment, and should they be compensated in any way? I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask you that.
Yeah, great question. And, you know, there certainly are there reasonable assignments? Yes, right. There are positions that it absolutely makes sense to ask someone to do an assignment, that allows them to demonstrate their capability. If somebody writes, if someone's applying for a content position, for example, giving them a writing assignment makes good sense. And giving each candidate the same writing assignment from a consistency standpoint makes sense. Now, what that writing assignment entails, to your point, is also another story, right? Where you certainly wouldn't want to ask a candidate to write, uh, you know, 20 pages of content. But it would make sense to, could we ask someone to write, I don't know, 250 words or 500 words, a brief article that would allow us to gauge their competency and skill, right? And so I think so. Certainly, that's the important piece of it.
Yeah, I'm just imagining an employer saying, "Hey, can you write a strategy plan for us?" Obviously, you're not going to want to have them do a whole strategy plan because, again, that's working for the company, and then of course you'll have to compensate them for that. But as you said, if you're just asking them to write, an article on a certain topic, and you're not actually using that article, from the person, then of course, that wouldn't be compensated as well. So you do have to just make sure that you're not asking the candidate to do, any type of work or something that appears to be work, because then otherwise you are going to have to pay them.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and strategy, organizations asking someone to write a strategy plan for them is certainly, I mean, that's a heavy lift,
Yeah,
right? For
absolutely.
sure. And goes beyond, to me, that's, to your point, moving into almost consulting for the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
That free labor. Like,
Yeah.
don't do that, employers. So how can HR professionals balance their need to gather enough insight into a candidate's qualifications and abilities and to make a sound hiring decision while ensuring a positive experience for that prospective employee?
Yeah, great. And it is a balance. And, I'll go back. I mentioned earlier, during a recruitment strategy meeting, HR professionals need to understand what we need to know to identify the right candidates, right? Like, what do we need to know to go out and source the appropriate candidates, to identify what the ideal candidate, the best hire will look like, and how can we move everybody through the process in the most efficient way. And so, we've talked about like addressing how many interviews do we really need, right? So that's an issue. Do we actually have to do we need an assignment or not? And is it relevant? And so sometimes you have to, uh, you know, sort of advise the hiring team, this is unrealistic, right? This is too time consuming. Help them. Sometimes you may even help them with their interview questions, right? I think at one point, there were organizations were kind of going through this phase where they were asking these very silly questions that they felt were kind of gleaning into getting a glimpse of the candidate's cultural alignment, where might ask, I don't know, who their favorite Harry Potter character is or
Yeah.
something like
Mhm.
that. Not
Mhm.
at all relevant. I don't, who cares, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's important to stick to the job, stick to, really hone in on the qualifications as you
Mhm.
point out, and balancing that transparency. Like, what's the time? Like, and
Mhm.
candidate aside, hiring teams are busy. You're running a
Mhm.
business, right?
Mhm.
Your hiring team is also, serving our members and doing a number of other things. And so obviously when you have an open role, you're prioritizing filling this position. But the reality of it all is you don't have 40 hours a week to fill this position. And so about finding that balance, right? How can I get the information that I need, learn about this person and whether they match the qualifications of the role, will they be a culture fit for the team? And and then kind of move on.
Yeah, and I think the balance part is really great because I've worked in retail, I've worked in restaurant over the years, I've worked in
Yeah.
hospitality, and I remember managers hiring a warm body is what they would say. I'm just
Yeah.
hiring a warm body. Well, that never works. So, taking too little time with a candidate is not going to be very fruitful for you.
Yep.
Taking too much time, of course, can hurt you as well. So it's finding that balance in between for those positions that you're looking for.
Yeah, right. I mean, is it, 30-minute phone screen, can you do a 1 hour panel interview with your team versus, five separate 1 hour interviews with their colleagues, things like that, right? And just making sure that you're asking meaningful questions that align with the identifying the right candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with the job previews that we do, where we have them sit with one of our advisors, the advisors are then giving us feedback as well. So it's almost like they're an interview, even though they're not actually doing a formal interview, but they're
Yep.
helping us to be able to identify people who might be good for the position that we're hiring them for. So it could be really helpful to do those job previews if it's something that you haven't thought about before.
Yeah.
So let's talk about social media for a minute. We know that social media, there's a lot of influencers out there. They're offering career tips and they've grown in popularity. Do you think that these influencers offer sage advice or do they really set those unrealistic expectations, for the candidates?
Yeah, I think there's some great social media influencers that give great career advice.
Mhm.
I follow a number of them myself. Most of them are HR professionals or, um, previously HR professionals who really have a passion for setting candidates up for success as they navigate their careers. And they give them good tips and sometimes they give them very very realistic advice, right? You know, and then there's other influencers who tell people like, you deserve to make X amount of money in this entry level job. Well, you know, that's not setting up a candidate for
Mhm.
success, right? It's not realistic advice. Um, and in fact, it could be detrimental. And so I think like anything else you see on the internet, right? You have to kind of gauge like, is this person giving me good advice? Uh, but there certainly are they all bad? Absolutely not. As I said, there's some really wonderful influencers who deeply care about helping people navigate their career journey. And then there's others who I think are just trying to create a splash.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw something on Instagram recently and I don't know exactly what it said, but basically it was somebody who had suggested a Fight Club Friday. And of course it's joking, but obviously you want to be careful about the things that you're actually looking at and taking advice from for sure. So where should HR pros begin when they're evaluating their organization's recruitment process? Obviously they're let's say there our audience members are listening to this and saying, you know what, we don't do that, but we'd like to do that. Or maybe we need to take a look at our process, or maybe their process just isn't, hasn't been very beneficial for them. What should they, what should they do? How do they begin?
Yeah, I mean, they really should start by, doing an audit of their current recruiting process. I mean, taking a look at key metrics, and and that could be anything from quality of hire, right? So something that is uh, qualitative, candidate experience, feedback from hiring managers, uh, you know, not necessarily time to fill, but, looking at the overall effectiveness and efficiency of the process and identifying, here's what we do really well. We get great feedback from hiring managers or, we get great feedback from candidates, but, the process is a little lengthy or, we eventually get there, but, we could speed up the process a little bit. And so I think you kind of have to take a look at a variety of different factors, both from like an experiential standpoint, and then from a productivity and effectiveness standpoint. And then, dig in where you can improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I have done is, and not saying this is at SHRM, but in my prior years, when I've hired someone, and let's say, for instance, they begin to have some job performance issues, I start to think to myself, okay, was there something that I missed during the interview process? Is there something
Yeah.
else that we can do to make it better so that we can ensure that the next person that we bring in, has this particular skill? So I'm always kind of looking at myself and the things that I do in the process to, understand better, why someone was successful or why somebody was not successful in the role.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Nicole, to wrap it up, what's the best way for our HR Pro audience to propose their recommended changes to leadership? So they've done this evaluation. Now they've got an idea of what they want to do. How do they propose it to their leadership?
Yeah, I think they then have to take the recommendations, right, and build a data-driven business case. And so, um, you know, it's really delivering a story and showing the potential impact on the organization. So,
Mhm.
as I mentioned, can you tell a story and say, if we do X, we can improve the talent acquisition efficiency. We can we can reduce costs. We can really build our employer brand and improve our overall candidate experience. And so, I think that that's the best way to go to leadership.
That's great. And I know I said to wrap it up, but I just have one more question. Is there anything else that you think our audience members should know about the talent acquisition process and, getting good results?
HR professionals, hiring managers, right? It can be easy to lose sight of the goal at times, and I think it's important to remember that uh, to remain curious, right? Sometimes we've talked about some of these issues, right? Giving unnecessary tasks, interviews, projects that can really bog down the candidate and in the interview process, and is it even helpful? And so I think, remembering that you're coming coming at the process wanting to learn more about this person, understand them as a professional and their fit for the role is really critical.
Nicole, thank you so much for all the information that you provided to our audience today. I know it's going to be really helpful to them. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Amber.
Absolutely. And that'll do it for this episode of Honest HR. See you next time.
This podcast is approved for zero 0.5 professional development credits, PDCs, towards SHRM-CP and SHRM-SCP recertification. Enter this PDC activity ID in your SHRM activity portal to log your credit. 26UHUW6. Once again, that's 26UHUW6. Expires March 1st, 2026.
SHRM.